I'm about to show you a selection of images labeled A and B, one of which will be images from the Sigma FPL, a 61 megapixel full frame tiny camera, and the other will be images from the new Leica SL3. All of the images were taken straight out of camera with zero editing involved. These photos aren't groundbreaking by any means. I will not be hanging them up anywhere. It's just for reference so you guys can get an idea of the overall image quality. So, can you tell the difference? So camera A was a Leica and camera B was the Sigma FPL. So I'll leave it up to you guys as to what image you prefer from each camera, but essentially I wanted to revisit the topic of high resolution sensors and sort of talk about the offerings that are currently available in the L mount. Of course, the Leica SL3 is the newest high resolution sensor camera to come to the L mount, but it's very, very expensive and of course, like most Leicas, completely unattainable. Whereas the Sigma FPL is a tiny little camera that costs around the £2,000 price point. You can probably get it cheaper now on the used market, and it has a really, really high resolution full frame sensor packed into a very small body. And there's definitely things about the FPL that I prefer to the Leica SL3, and then vice versa, there's things that I prefer about the SL3 compared to the FPL. And that's sort of what I want to talk about in today's video, since I thought it'd be really interesting to talk about the photography side of things a little bit, and also the high resolution photography side of things, since the only three cameras to talk about in the L mount really in this sort of category are the Leica SL series, the FPL, and of course the S1R, which is long awaited its successor. So one positive for me about the FPL over the SL3 as a photography camera is the customization of your image in camera, in the sense that there's loads of different color profiles to choose from. In fact, there's actually quite a few nice ones that I like, including the forest green profile is really nice, the warm gold's lovely, and so is the cinema one if you dial it back a little bit. So the FPL definitely has a lot more flexibility for sort of getting a nice image straight out of camera if you were wanting to shoot JPEGs, for example, or even applying that sort of color profile to your raw file after the fact inside your editing software. Whereas the SL3 is a lot more limited in that sense, and of course you have the Leica Looks app now, which sort of gives you a few looks, but if I'm being honest, those looks aren't great at all. In fact, I find that they're quite overbaked, overbearing, and not really pleasing at all. So the FPL definitely wins in that sense if you are looking for a camera where you could just shoot really nice JPEGs and get really attractive results straight away. But I don't particularly think that the color palette of Leica is too dissimilar from what we get from the modern Lumix cameras, and I've got another video about that which you can watch here after you finish watching this video, of course. So it sort of lent the question of, really what is the point, image-wise in owning a Leica, and that's still something that I'm trying to get my head around. But the SL3 of course does have many sort of upgrades to this, of course, in its video shooting modes and general sort of usability and stuff. But do I think that the image quality alone is worth that sort of £4,000 increase compared to the FPL? No, I don't. But then at the same time, the FPL is an older camera, and there's definitely loads of quirks with this thing that I'm going to get into now. So the first big quirk for me with the FPL is actually how laggy it is in playback. And what I mean by that is if you go ahead, take a photo and you want to review that image, then for some reason it just takes an eternity to do so. It's almost like the processor can't really keep up with a 61 megapixel imaging sensor. So it's definitely a much slower sort of workflow compared to, let's say, a much faster camera like an S5 II or even the SL3 for that matter. I must say it is really annoying though if you did want to go back and just check an image is in focus or something, and it just takes a long time to get back into that playback menu and then back again. And then sort of building upon that, this camera only has an electronic shutter, not a mechanical shutter, which means that shooting in sort of fluorescent lighting or artificial lighting scenarios, you really do need to be careful about what shutter speed you select so you don't get any weird banding. And I guess all of the above means that the SL3 has many, many strengths over the FPL in that sense. But then again, going back to the whole price point here, is it worth £4,000 more? I just don't know. The SL3 is a very nice camera to use, and I must say that I enjoyed the shooting experience with that camera more so than the FPL. But that doesn't mean that the FPL was bad in that sense, because of course the small form factor is great for street photography or where you just want to run a little bit under the radar compared to bringing a massive bulky DSLR-like shaped body. And I actually found that really useful when I was shooting in London, because normally I don't like shooting, let's say in train stations or actually on the tube, because you know I sort of get nervous and I don't really want people to think that I'm being a weirdo taking their photo when they don't want it. Whereas the FPL allowed me to do that a lot more so than the SL3 would. But of course the only caveat to that is we are now in artificial lighting scenarios, which means that you need to be very careful, like I said, about that electronic shutter not giving you any banding issues. But that being said, I am extremely pleased with the images that I've been able to get out of the FPL, even with those in-camera picture profiles that I discussed earlier. I just think that Sigma have done a really good job at producing very nice files with the FPL. So if you don't mind the sort of slower nature of shooting, because of course it's a little bit more laggy in comparison to the SL3 in terms of pretty much everything, the autofocus, the processing speeds and all that sort of stuff. But if you don't mind that you can get a very good camera for photography that will give you extremely nice results in pretty much any situation. Now, I didn't really have the time or the chance to sort of do a stress test on both of the sensors from the SL3 and the FPL. And what I mean by stress test is basically seeing how each sensor performs in high ISO or low light environments. Of course, being higher resolution sensors, they're not really built for low light or not really ideal lighting scenarios, because of course pixels work like buckets in the sense that the more pixels you have, the smaller the buckets are on the sensor, and the less pixels you have, the bigger the buckets are to capture all of that light. So if you did want to have a low light camera, then I probably wouldn't pick either of those. The rear LCD screen is also fixed on the Sigma camera, which means that if you did want to get any low angle shots, it's going to be a little bit more tricky to do compared to the SL3 or the likes of the S5 II, etc. So that could be a big stickler for anyone that does want to get a bit more creative with the angles that they shoot in. But you know, there's sort of give and takes with the form factor that you choose, and you know, they tried to make this the smallest full frame camera ever in the world, and at the time of its release I believe it was. It might even still be the smallest full frame camera ever. I don't know whether the S9 changes things or not, but yeah, so that was obviously why they went for a fixed LCD. And then the final point that I want to make about the FPL is the battery life. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it's got fantastic battery life by any means, but I also wouldn't say that it has the absolute worst battery life I've ever seen. It's definitely not great. I mean, it's still better than the Blackmagic cameras that I've used. I mean, most of those have absolutely terrible battery life, but you're not going to really get too much out of a single battery on the FPL. So if you were going to be doing a photo walk one day, definitely bring at least 2 or 3 batteries with you, because you will find yourself chewing through them quite quickly. Now, I actually haven't tested the video side of the FPL at all, and I've got very good reasons for why that is. And that's because the resolution of the sensor is definitely not ideal for video shooting. For video, I'd much prefer to use a sensor that has less pixels, because like I said, it's better in low light. And also this camera has some insanely bad rolling shutter, again linking back to the whole processing issue. Because the processor can't keep up with a 61 megapixel sensor, it means that the readout speeds aren't going to be amazing. So since this thing also doesn't have stabilization, it means that with that really bad rolling shutter plus no stabilization, you're going to need to put this thing on a gimbal or rig it up somewhat to actually get some usable video footage out of it, and that's just not something that I'm willing to do. So ultimately, if I was in the market for a high resolution camera in the L mount and I had to pick between what's on the market currently, the FPL would still be a strong contender for many reasons. Like I said, the flexibility of getting different images or looks out of camera is a massive one for me, since that's how I like to do photography sometimes. And also the form factor is very fitting too, since it can just slide into a very small bag with a small lens, and then you can go without worrying about bringing a massive heavy camera. That being said, the FPL is definitely not a workhorse camera. I would not pick this camera camera out for shooting any sort of commercial work, to be honest, because it's just too slow and it can't keep up with that sort of stuff. That's where the SL3 really comes in, if I'm being honest. Like, it is a true workhorse camera in the sense that it also displays fantastic build quality. It's built to stand the test of time, and you know, it can do some really quick off the cuff things that the FPL just couldn't do. So that's really the sort of deciding factor between the two cameras. If I was to wrap this video up, is that if you want a high resolution camera for a workhorse, sort of put it through the paces sort of body, then the SL3 is definitely going to be the better choice. But if you wanted to shoot some high resolution stills and you're not really too concerned about how it deals with sort of fast-paced shoot environments, then the FPL will definitely deliver that, and will also give you a lot of flexibility in camera if you did just want to shoot and then take those JPEGs and share them straight away. If you're interested in seeing how the Leica color science shapes up compared to the Lumix color science, then definitely check out this video next. I think you'll find it quite interesting, and hopefully I'll see you over there.